Thank you so much for having us today. I'm really excited to be here. This topic is very interesting to me on many levels. I am in the news business, and I've been in the news business for a while, just about 20 years now. But I consistently find myself to be the only Latina at the table, or just one of a few Latinas at the table. And for me, in 2019, I find that unacceptable and shocking. But this topic is also constantly making headlines. Inclusion and diversity. So I'm going to try to jog your memory a little bit and let me know if you recall this. Everybody's familiar with the Prada brand, right? So do you recall what happened recently with those figurines that caused quite a stir? Everybody know about it? Yep. So someone at the company thought that those figurines resembling blackface would be a good idea. And so here's what happened. On the Friday, after a huge uproar, the company decided to remove all of the blackface from the stores, and they apologized. So by Saturday evening, the company had gone further, promising to form an advisory council to guide their efforts on diversity, inclusion, and culture, and to perform a post-mortem to determine just how such a product had reached the sales floor at all. That one actually tickled me. I don't know how you felt about it. This other one I don't think you heard of in the news. It's a national story, but it didn't quite hit all of the markets. So there was a play-by-play announcer for the Iowa Hawkeyes. He was suspended indefinitely after saying that a player on the opposing team was, quote, like King Kong at the end of the game. That player is 6'10", and he is from Angola. The announcer released a statement of apology that said, in part, I will use this as an opportunity to grow as a person and learn more about unconscious bias. That man is Caucasian. So we have an incredible panel here with us today that I am very excited to introduce to you. These are experienced leaders and innovators, and they're going to help us navigate this dialogue today. So what I'm asking is at the end that you have all of your questions formulated. I'm going to pretty much ask a couple of questions to start off the panel discussion, but really the goal here is to learn as much as we possibly can from these great experts. So I am going to start the introductions, and I want to tell you that I asked everybody to give me a little bit of a self-introduction, so I'm going to share that with you today, the real titles and then the self-introduction. So here to my left is Tyronne Stoudemire. He's Vice President, Global Diversity and Inclusion for Hyatt, and the way that he self-introduces. I am the son of Carolyn, the husband of Valerie, the father of Kennedy. Women have helped to shape my world view. Kind of cool, huh?
Yeah, I want to redo mine.
Yeah, me too.
You want to redo? I didn't tell them ahead of time. I said, you'll all be surprised when you get out there. Okay, we have Chad Nico Hugh. Nico's my son, by the way, so I'm very partial to your name. National Director, Diversity and Inclusion, the YMCA. And he self-identifies or would self-introduce as hopeful creator of safe space.
Not as good as yours.
Sayar Lonial, Executive Director, Marketing and Communications, NYU Tandon. And, oh no, I got more.
That's it.
Sorry, I took these notes, so I have to now read my notes. Okay, so he says, the lessons I've learned are transferable everywhere, and that is why I am here today. And then we welcome Lauren Ryan, Vice President, New Products, Greenhouse Software, and she says she is leading teams of builders. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today. So our first question for you today, many organizations think about diversity and inclusion and they want to do better, but don't know where to start. What approaches have you seen that improve outcomes in this area? And Tyronne, I'm going to begin with you, but then from that point forward, feel free everybody to chime in and just have a conversation.
Great, thank you, and I'm very honored to be here today.
So I have a little bit about me. I work at Hyatt, but I spent 18 years at Hyatt Associates, where I began to work with diversity and inclusion. We built the models internally, then went to marketplace and sold it as consulting solutions. So when you talk about diversity, diversity is the matrix, inclusion is the behavior, and equity is the goal. So in order to accomplish that, you have to assess where the organization is first. And it's something that has to happen top down and bottom up simultaneously. I think people at the bottom of the organization, boots on the ground, they're living diversity, they're interacting, they see it, they feel it. The top of the house have a tendency to be focused. I've heard someone say stakeholder value. I don't lay down and wake up and say I'm going to focus on stakeholder value. Are focusing on that. Right? I agree with that, by the way. I don't do that either. But I say that there's just really understanding that it has to start at the top of the house, and leaders have to embrace this work and to be able to communicate it through the organization. Now, I have a big fan of the evidence-based diversity strategy, leading with the analytics and the predictive analytics. So understanding what your internal labor market looks like by levels through the organization, by gender, race, within the organization, and I would advise you not to just categorize it as people of color, because oftentimes people of color will sub-optimize Latinos and African Americans, particularly in your technology groups where there's predominantly Asians, right? So you do need to break them out by levels, and you can look at the organization, you'll see. Now, in the compliance world, they say that nothing speaks louder than zero, and in the finance world, they say the data doesn't lie. So when you see the representation or the lack thereof in your organization, that is where you need to provide interventions. So at Hyatt, we're working on what we call Project Workforce 2025. By 2025, we should be close to reaching parity with hires, promotions, and exits. Natural attrition plus retirements equals opportunities. You designate those opportunities to what's available in your labor market, your internal labor market. You want to be identifying that. Helps with succession planning. It helps with career best. We've done this now at Hyatt, and we're now in our third year, and we've seen, when we started it, we had a high turnover rate of women. We were hiring women, people of color, at a much faster rate than that of white men, but they were leaving at a faster rate. So now we can focus on that retention piece, and retention was lack of promotions. So again, you only have so many resources, right, to get this work done. And you want to be deliberate and intentional about where you want to guide the organization. So it gave us an opportunity to really dive deep around retention issues across all the demographics by levels. So first you want to start with defining what it means for your organization. You then want to be able to look at the data analytics and the predictive analytics. And the predictive analytics will let you know that it will take 2020, 25, 26, maybe 2050 to reach parity in some organizations. And then sometimes you have to go 2, if not 3 levels down to get women and people of color in your organization, so that's a different type of strategy that you have to do. So I think data analytics, predictive analytics, and then you have to have well-being and organizations that really want to do this, that understand this is just not the nice thing to do. There's a business imperative to not having a diverse team, right? And when you compare that with the external labor market to determine where you lie, in the city of Chicago and hospitality for Chicago, we over-index with women. We have the market share of women. So if we just looked internally and began to promote and develop programs to promote our women, we'll be fine with that number. So the external labor market is critically important, and the internal labor market. And in some markets, you don't have the rest of diversity, so you may have to move talent from one region to another. So again, that's how we've done it at Hyatt, and it's proven to be pretty successful going forward. So I'll stop there because there's a lot to say around it, but I think just to review, you want to define diversity and inclusion, what it means for your organization. You want to have a strong communication strategy through the organization led by your leaders, and then certainly you want to look at the analytics and the predictive analytics to set targets and tasks, and you want to look at from hires, promotions, and exits. Those are the 3 categories that I would encourage you to look at. So workforce, workplace, and marketplace.
I think, Lauren, I see you nodding over there.
Yeah, I totally agree. But what I think is interesting is that perspective is exactly what executives in this room should do to start, right? Like, if you're an executive in this room, you can go and ask for the data. You can look at how demographics pass through your hiring pipeline and where folks fall out that you might not have expected. You can see who accepts your offers and how that compares against demographics. Once they're here, you can see how they get promoted and how they get paid. And from there, you can start to come up with a strategy. I think I've chatted with so many folks that really are not at the executive level, that want to start something inside their company and feel stalled out by not being able to get buy-in from the executive group, not knowing how to get commitment to move past, like, we think this is important, to, like, let's take action on it and actually do something. And to those folks, I would say, like, don't wait necessarily for your whole executive team to do a data review and come up with a strategy. Design what pilots that make sense for your group. So if you're in the recruiting team, you can do simple things like create a checklist where maybe you have a role where you get so many applicants every time you wouldn't necessarily need to go proactively look for people. Do it anyways on those roles and do it with the perspective of looking to build a diverse pipeline. If you are like a mid-level manager and looking to help bring more diverse talent onto your team, I've heard this really smart strategy where you all commit to doing 3 coffee chats a quarter with someone from an underrepresented background to build future pipeline for your team. And you just track it in a spreadsheet.
That's a good best practice.
Yeah.
Give it up.
There's lots of little tactics that don't necessarily require the whole strategy to be in place, because then you can like prove that it works and start to get buy-in for building something more holistic.
Yeah,
Sayar?
I guess I would start by saying I come at it from a different perspective. We're creating the next generation of thinkers, doers, and leaders, because I work at a university. And specifically, I work at an engineering school, which has been a male-dominated field forever, just to be honest. And so what we've realized is that for true future changes that will make a difference in everybody's life to happen, we need to have the engineering school better reflect the place where we live and the world that we live in. And so we've made a real effort of recruiting women, and I'm proud to say that this year's incoming class is 43% female, which is 20% over the national average. Thank you. I agree, that's great, but part of that is creating an environment where women, when they come to the school, they have role models to look at, which has now driven up our hiring of tenure-track faculty, female faculty, of which we've had more and more over the last 4 years, 5 years, increasing in numbers all the time, including this year. We brought in a new dean, who's a woman from Carnegie Mellon, and this is her first year. So currently, on Monday in New York City, there will be a meeting of the 3 deans of Columbia, CUNY Grove School of Engineering, and NYU Tandon. They're all female. We call that the changing face of engineering in New York City. I think the introduction that Zoraida gave about me is that we've learned some really good lessons in Brooklyn and in New York, and we think these are transferable everywhere. Because anybody that tells you you have to give up excellence to create diversity, they're lying to you.
They're lying.
They're absolutely lying to you, because our SAT scores are higher than anybody else. I'm not saying that's the best gauge of anything, and we can go down that road if we want, but that is the way we let people in schools. Our SAT scores are higher than they've ever been, and we are getting more female applicants, and we are getting better applicants on all levels. So we're not lowering any standards, and we're creating better students who will then go on to the workplace and become better leaders. And again, not everybody's a leader. Some people are doers, and I actually think this is an important thing to differentiate. Not everybody has to take up the cause and lead the cause. We just need more people in the workplace. And so that's been our tact, and I think that those lessons are really important, because we're creating a community, not just saying, let's check the box of more women. That's not what we're looking to do. We want to actually create a community where everybody can succeed. Absolutely. And I'll leave it there.
I just have a quick question there. What's the ethnic diversity amongst those women?
Don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay, just curious.
That is yet an opportunity,
Sorry.
I think. And that's a very good question, but that's an opportunity.
It absolutely is an opportunity, and as we start to look at how we create, again, we're in Brooklyn. Brooklyn's a pretty diverse community.
Yeah.
We want our campus to look like Brooklyn. So we need to focus on breaking down all of the barriers, and there's certainly large barriers among African American and Latino community in engineering as well. We need to actually go out and fix that, because we think that there are people who are very good at it, and if they don't have the skill set, we want to create K-12 STEM programs so that they can make a decision to go into STEM, as opposed to having that decision made for them by a public school system that's not supporting that. And so that's where we're focusing on the pre-college programs, not just for us, but for actually all universities and all programs, kids making the right decisions for themselves, and making sure they have the skill sets ahead of time.
Chad?
So I think from a slightly different perspective, the Y is present in 119 countries, YMCA, excuse me. We serve 10,000 communities. We have over 800 independently incorporated 501c3 organizations that are chartered as YMCAs. And so at YMCA of the USA, we're the national support office, but we have to lead through influence. So it becomes very interesting, very challenging, and very amazing to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion work through that lens. To build off something Tyronne said, he talked about defining it. The one question that we always ask for our local Ys and our staff and our volunteers and our board members to do is to think about what outcome you're trying to drive to. Is it just so that our staff and volunteer teams represent the diversity of communities that we serve? That is important, but it's not just that. For us, it's about being able to represent and effectively engage all segments of the communities that we serve so that when our communities find themselves in situations of tension or strife or hardship or hurt or pain, hopefully, that the Y can be one of the many places. Oftentimes, we like to refer to ourselves as an anchor organization, a part of, not apart from community where everyone can feel comfortable. The last two words of our mission statement are for all. I was leading a training once and like a 20-year-old program director stood up in the middle and challenged me and said, for all for what? Mr. D&I, why? So your pictures look diverse and pretty, what is the point? And my sort of stumbling response was, so that everyone can feel welcome, so that one day there's some place in every community where folks that may not agree on what channel to watch on TV for the news, may not agree on who they voted for in the last election, may not agree on how they identify what they believe or what ideology they subscribe to, politically or faith-based, that they can find common ground, and that's what we try to do. We do have metrics that we strive to lift up. We have a business case for this work that's garnered in the operational framework of how the Y works. But to be honest, it's more about community. For us, what makes it work is if we can sometimes stop talking, as my colleague Michael Farris, who's here in the audience, tells me all the time, and listen. Because sometimes we who want to do this work, we drive from a place of passion. So we get the right people around the table, then we talk at them for 2 hours. I do that all the time. I am extremely verbose. But that doesn't work if we're actually trying to garner consensus, collective input on a way forward.
So all of us here in the room believe in diversity and inclusion, I suspect, right? That is why we are here today. So there is a new report that's out, just March 4th. It is from Fortune, and it says, there are real reasons to believe that the work of chief diversity officers will not have the impact their bosses and boards expect. And here's a quick snapshot as to why. A lot of them are new to the role. They don't have the power they need to make a difference. They don't have the data they need to make a difference. And other leaders aren't on board. Does anybody say amen in the audience? You can say it, unless you're sitting next to your boss. So how do we respond to that?
Can I take a stab at that? I think so. For the Y, we do have a senior vice president and chief diversity officer that is a direct report to our CEO. That is not me. I always tell her that I don't want her job. I do think one of the important things that to your point, Zoraida, that we think about is it isn't just the title or the role. You're talking about influence. For us at YMCA of the USA, thanks to our CEO, Kevin Washington, we work really hard to ensure that there are a presence, not only of folks that work on the D&I team, but of folks that bring different perspectives at all levels. So not only is Linda, who's our chief diversity officer, direct report to Kevin, she sits on the executive team. She's present at the national board meetings. She's present in our operations team meetings and in our strategic planning committee. So I think the other piece of it, the space has to be safe. Throwing someone in a room and saying, oh, you're the chief diversity officer, go be a chief and be diverse. It just doesn't work that way. There has to be a structure that starts to tackle some of the systemic challenges when meetings are held, how meetings are held, who creates the agenda, who gets to speak, who moderates it, and what's the goal? We all love to meet just to meet, right? That's probably not going to work if there's tough, crucial conversations on critical social issues that need to happen.
I think you first and foremost have to know how your organization makes money, because money talks. Right? I'm in hospitality. We have 100,000 employees across more than 60 countries. When I started 4 years ago, we had 300 hotels. We're now 700. Every 13 days for the rest of the year, there'll be Hyatts built someplace around the world. So we have 1,000 hotels by the end of the year. Enormous amount of growth. Our primary goal is to get heads in beds. Pretty simple, right? We're one of the two largest organizations in our history, hospitality and hospitals, right? But yet, traditional legacy was just that only white men can run hotels. The data supports that. That becomes the narrative. We're a purpose-driven organization. Our purpose is to care for people to be their best. When we say people, we're talking about all people. So we're linking our strategy to our values and to our purpose, and inclusion diversity is a manifestation of that. So no one gets a pass. For example, we have a very small board. We have 2 women and an African-American male on the team who constantly drives that agenda for us from top of the board. The next level is our CEO. We have, after 3 years, I'm proud to say that we have parity. We have 3 men and 3 women. I can uniquely see the difference in the behaviors of our leaders and our business based upon having that diverse mix. I mentioned our CEO just the other day. I said, do you recognize that you sit in a C-suite, you're the only man, you're now the minority. Because the 3 women that sit there have 3 admins who are female. How do you feel? Right? So I'm a big fan. It's the aha moment, feedback. People should be able to self-correct, influence others, and influence the systems. So the data is really important to have that in place, but it's also the follow-up. So now we have 7 diversity business resource groups. Each of those resource groups, executive sponsors, are executive committee members. And they're opposite of those groups, so we're building what we call cross-cultural competence, the ability to discern and take into account other worldviews to be able to solve problems and resolve conflicts in ways that maximize cultural differences for long-lasting solutions to outperform the competition. Very long definition. But our leaders, our COO and one of our senior leaders in legal is over Hyatt Black. They're white men. We have 2 white females who are over our Pride group, who are straight. We have 2 white women who are over our Asia Pacific Islanders who are white women. Our CHO is African American, is over women at Hyatt, and people say, well, she's a woman, but white women have never worked with black women before. Therein lies the difference. Therein lies the opportunity. Our chairman and CEO is actually the chair of our Global Inclusion Diversity Council, and I'm the co-chair. So in tandem, that becomes a part of our strategy. Every Monday, there's a conversation about what's happening with diversity. It's on the agenda, and it's getting pretty competitive. Nice. The first quarter, you typically have Martin Luther King's Day and Black History and Women in History Month, and so the other executives who are in the latter part of the year don't have much to talk about. And so, tell me what's going on with the women. Tell me what's going on with the Latinos. What's going on with the Asians, right? They're actively getting involved and engaged. This year for Black History Month, we did the State of Black Tourism. Blacks will spend $69 billion in travel with an estimate of 12.7 by 2020. We are not getting the market share of that. We had a program, we talked about the demographics, we talked about the spending power. We're not gathering consumer insights on any demographic. That's a process improvement. At the end of that program, we went into action planning that was led by our leader of that particular group. They talked, what are we going to do when we leave this session today? We're moving beyond Taco Tuesday and Fried Rice Friday, and we're immersing ourselves into the business imperative, right? We've got to figure that out.
Politically correct in this room.
It's okay. No, so the reality is that you have to engage everybody. You're going to have early adapters. You're going to have, first of all, innovators. You're going to have early adapters, and 80% of your people are going to probably be late adapters, who are good people, but are sitting on the sidelines waiting for something to happen, waiting to be invited, waiting to be told what to actually do, because diversity is like touching the third rail. Nobody wants to talk about it. If you ever want to end a meeting early in your organization, bring up the word diversity. Everybody's gone. Right? If you have some folks at your house and you want them to go, I've had it. Let's talk about diversity. Did you see what's going on in the news? We reported last week. It is a tough topic to discuss.
It is. And so anybody else on the panel have some experiences with that? Because one of the things that you mentioned was, how do you feel being in the minority? So has that surfaced in any of your organizations? Oh, nobody wants to answer. Lauren, I'm going to put you in the hot seat.
Laura, you got it.
So the question is, how have I felt my organization being a minority?
No, more along the line. Well, maybe that's the question.
Oh, stepped into it. I mean, you recognize it, right? Like, I'm on the executive team. It's mostly male, and we're all white. I notice it, most rooms that I'm in, but I also notice the space that they create for me, and that there's like a very intentional effort of making sure that I don't have to notice it and feel any certain way about it. And so I think as we lead teams and notice similar dynamics on our teams, that's the thing that I strive for as well, is it's not that you're not going to notice if you're the only female engineer on a team of male engineers, but how do you make sure that that person has the space to just do their work anyways, the best way they possibly can? I don't know if anyone has something different.
I mean, I guess I would just say 3 quick things. One, I am an Indian at an engineering school, so I'm not in the minority.
Yep.
Laying that out there right now. But with that said, I do marketing and communications and government affairs and community affairs. I am a minority in that field in the fact that there's not a lot of Indians who do that. It has had 0 effect in my workplace. In fact, I am encouraged to do what I want because of, again, going back, patting myself on the back here a little bit, but because of the fact that I'm good at what I do, right? And so being good at what you do allows people to say, oh, I'm not going to look at them as being Indian doing marketing, communications, government affairs. Sayar's the person that does it, right? So I think there's, again, diversity and excellence, they shouldn't clash.
Yeah.
You know, the other part of it is that conversations about diversity, while they may be uncomfortable, should not come up in just positions of conversations about diversity. If it is an influence and a goal of an institution like ours is, right? So we have made 3 big goals under our new president, Andy Hamilton, that have said that affordability, diversity, and Brooklyn, right? And we'll get to that in a minute. But the simple fact of the matter is that we don't just talk about diversity when it comes to diversity. We talk about diversity when it comes to finance. We talk about diversity when it comes to this particular program. We talk about, if it's going to be something that you're going to tackle, it can't just be the conversation about, well, how do we get to be more diverse? It literally has to pervade everything that you're doing. If that's going to be a goal of yours to try to figure it out, then you have to make it part of everyday conversation. As difficult as it may be, you legitimately have to do that. The same thing with affordability, which, by the way, in academia is a really uncomfortable conversation to have. And then the third thing I would just say is thank God for young people. Like that's who we have to respond to, right? Every day I have to go to work, and guess who my board is? It's all of these 18 to 25-year-olds who want to make the world different than it is when they got there, right? We have to respond to them. They're saying they want to see more faculty of color. Great, we have to make an effort to do that. We have to respond to this. So I say, you know, this is what's easier, and maybe academia is easier this way, but this is what's great about what we have, is that we constantly have an influx of young people that are constantly focused on change, right? That's exciting. That's a good place to go to work, and that's a place to have the conversation about how do we make those changes. And by the way, diversity and affordability and Brooklyn are all part of that in every day of my life.
And
I would
I-
add to
go ahead.
that, which is that I think diversity should be a very part of all conversations, but it's really inclusion where the hard work is. That's the behavior change that has to happen. It's all the minutia that happen in every meeting across your company. It's inclusion that can get off the rails, which hurts the ability to have a diverse company. And it's the harder stuff to talk about, too.
I'd say diversity without inclusion leads to confusion.
That's nice.
Or
Somebody
you
should
just
tweet
lose
that
diversity, like
Tweet that,
everyone will leave.
and tag him. If I can add to that, I think
Of
so.
course.
The question around sort of being in the minority. So one of the things that I think is important is separating out the challenges, inequities, and biases that we face as individuals, regardless of the role that we hold or the title that we hold, if we're trying to lead or support this work, and understanding and knowing the readiness from an organizational capacity standpoint of our business or of our company. So I am an openly gay man serving in the YMCA. I don't know if that's a minority, but I do know that it makes it very, very challenging for having conversations when we talk about faith and the perception that Christianity, or any faith for that matter, and inclusion of the LGBTQ community is mutually exclusive, because it's not. Right? I have to many times subjugate myself and recognize that my inner response when someone says something to me might be to ask someone to hold my earrings and hold my bag because we need to have a conversation. But my professional response needs to be what Linda, what my boss says all the time is fix your face, because I want to look like this and I have to go look like this. And say, thank you so much, you know? And my former colleague, Tequila, who's with Best Buy now, she's in the audience too, and one thing I learned from her is when people tell you or show you, and sometimes those are different, who they are, believe them. You must have talked to Tequila.
That's actually a quote from Maya Angelou that said, and that was really very true.
Sorry,
that
I
when
confused
people
Tequila.
show you and tell you who they are. So in your organization, when you're able
Absolutely.
to justify that people are not for it, I would not use the energy. We have a tendency to go to those who are that 1% that's not on board. I would go to the higher percentage of the people who got it and run with it through the organization and get more people. And they'll figure out, now I'm not excluded. I'm not a part of the diversity thing. I need to join one of the groups. I will tell you, I have several leaders now trying to be on the diversity council and lead the DBRGs that I didn't have 3 3 years ago because they're making an impact on our business. We're making an impact on the future generation.
Absolutely.
One of our programs we have is called Rise High. There's 7 million unemployed youth around the world, 100,000 in this city. We feel that we can actually go into the communities and train them on how to work in hospitality, right? Who may choose not to go on to college. That's a society issue. You know, and the people just happen to be people of color in these communities that we feel we can make a difference in the lives of others. We have to be able to execute on the visions and missions that we have of our organizations. If we say that we make the world a better place for everybody, that means everybody. Just not a certain class or a certain group of individuals. This is not work for the weary. This is not work for the meek. This is strong in heart and those who are going to fight to the end to close the gap. And let me be very clear. Women have to work with women, and women of color are simply sometimes optimized in the umbrella of women.
That's right.
We have women, but how many of those women are women of color? Nothing speaks louder than zero. Every time I share the data with this is not right, data's not right. Bad data in, bad data out. Let's look around the room and tell me who's missing. Just like Sesame Street, which one of these don't belong? Right? What's going on? You know, and people have to understand is that we cannot minimize people because of their race, their gender, or their orientation. We should maximize and leverage. Diversity is not a problem to be managed. It is an opportunity to leverage.
And I think if I could, I think from the Y lens, yes, and we have to be very cautious about being exclusive in our inclusion efforts, because sometimes that invalidates what we're trying to do. It's easy to have an echo chamber of folks. And in the Y, to be honest, we have a lot of that. But if we really are trying to, whatever our organization is, if we're trying to be a bridge builder, we can't build bridges amongst ourselves, right? Without struggle, there's no progress. I think that's Frederick Douglass. We need to make sure that we're leaning into these spaces and situations without the prejudice or bias that somehow one of us is more righteous than the other because of who we are, where we were born, and what we believe. I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm crazy to work in Chicago. I do this work and I live here, especially in the polar vortex, but I do this like so many of us in the Y. We serve because we believe in what the Y can do. And it's not a commercial for the Y. All of us in this room are here because we believe in change. But change doesn't happen if we talk to ourselves.
Sayar, I want to leave some time for questions, but I at least want to address unconscious bias and some effective ways in addressing it and whether or not technology could help. And I'm going to give us about another 3 minutes to have a conversation and then open it up to some questions. Wow.
No pressure.
Yeah, so I think it can help. I think technology is a tool, much like anything, and it's who's mastering or who's guiding the tool on how one utilizes it. But I definitely think that data, if it's clean data, AKA not cleaned data, but actually real data that's coming in.
It's sad we know what you're talking about, by the way.
But I think, yes, I think you can start to garner a true picture of what something or what a place is like based upon actual data that you're compiling. And I think that can determine, are there unconscious biases in hiring, in promoting, in recruiting, in what jobs we're bringing on campus to interview for our students, what types of jobs, what they are. Again, I go back to, I love young people because young people demand change and they demand differences, and so they push us to do more. I think it is possible for technology, but I certainly don't think it's the crutch that everybody should rely on.
Totally
It definitely has to go back to, I think, an earlier point of, if there is a chief diversity officer, or if diversity has become, or inclusion, as Lauren put, I think, which is probably the more apropos perspective, if that is something that you as an entity or an organization or as an individual want to create more of, you have to be honest with yourself. And we all walk around with baggage.
Yes,
we all
absolutely.
know we do. Right? And it's not, and that baggage is who we are and what made us, it's what has driven us to the place that we are. And it's learning from that baggage and how we move beyond it if it's a case of that it's bigoted or there's problems with the baggage that we carry. But it's that willingness to look into it that is just literally the first step. And technology can help with that, but there has to be an understanding amongst the individual that they want to make that change, or the entity that they want to make that change.
Lauren, I'm going to let you have the last word.
Great.
It's a girl thing.
Is that a bias?
It is indeed. Guilty.
I will
But that wasn't unconscious.
That wasn't.
That was
not.
explicit.
But,
I'll
that,
take
but
it.
I do need to say this. There's conscious bias and there's unconscious bias. I want to be very clear. There's conscious bias, unconscious bias, and collective bias. Organizations make collective biases all the time. We're only going to recruit from Cornell. That's a bias, and you ask yourself why you don't have diversity, right? We all have it, right? But here's the deal. Because it's unconscious and we're now conscious, you only get one shot at it. Once you recognize that it's unconscious bias, you can't play that card ongoing again. There are some consequences that most of have dignity and respect policies that falls under that. We've got to hold people accountable to that behavior. I'm sorry.
I feel like I need to scoot back a little bit here.
I digress.
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Lauren, go ahead.
So I will build on what both of you said. And I think there is a role for technology, and it does not mitigate the need for people to do their own personal work and decide that they want to show up and be inclusive every day. But once you decide that, there is a lot of research that shows that what you really need is like structure and the ability to think slower to be able to try and get out of the quick decisions we're making that cause these patterns that hurt us all the time. And so if you think about technology as simply like a system that helps you say like, okay, what are the behaviors I want my organization to do? How do I put a little process in place to make sure that they're checklisting this the way I think they should? You can scale your efforts of trying to be inclusive inside an organization. The head of D&I and the executive team like has to be behind that, but you need a way to follow it throughout your whole organization and make sure those behaviors work as well. And I think that combined with all the data we've been talking about is where technology can really accelerate the efforts that we're all undertaking inside our organization.
I would love to stay here all afternoon, but we don't have time. Do we have any questions? I probably could take two. Yes.
One of the things I did hear any of you address is, and it's been a huge problem here in Chicago for decades, is the minority of the person with a criminal record. You know, one
absolutely,
of the things that we really have to do, because it creates this continual cyclical poverty, and it's just horrible. I've done a lot of ministerial work on the west side, the south side of Chicago, mentoring kids, and the thing is, until we find a way to inculcate former convicted felons or just criminals back into society with meaningful jobs that will allow them to support families, we're going to have this problem. And it's one thing I have never heard of discussed with diversity programs.
So
Go ahead.
this is where great, that's great. And I'm not from, I live in New York. But I do read the papers and I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think, and we have the same issues in New York as well. What I will say, this is where I think technology can help the most, right? So there can be online programs that, and technology-based programs that can help train and retrain individuals on, and upskill individuals or skill individuals in some cases, right? So if you are a high school dropout and you've gone through the penal system through your life, you probably didn't gain a lot of the office skills or the back office skills or any of the computer skills for what this next generation is, or the next century is actually the jobs that are going to be there. And so I think there are major technology operations, and I think what we need to do is we need to encourage our governments to support nonprofits that are doing things like this, that are in the community. I don't want to create a new layer of let's do this. There are great organizations that exist within communities, and they need to take the technology, and they need to get the grants from the government to be able to do it. And higher education can certainly help with some of that as well.
And I think if I could add to that we have to think about it from a systemic lens too. We're talking about programmatic solutions. Michael would say that we need to also look at the extent to which any business, college, or nonprofit can tackle institutional. Mandatory minimums are different. If we actually talk about the real issues, then we can open awareness of what the solutions can be in addition to what my colleague said.
Quite frankly, that was as part of us building Rise High. And for our legal department, our legal colleagues go to the South Side every Saturday on Saturday to do expungements. Right, so looking at ways to help to counter that. And in that Rise High program, a lot of those individuals are individuals who are incarcerated, who can't get jobs, and we feel that we can employ them in hospitality. So it's going to take all institutions. It just can't be laid on one. And the system is flawed. So I nominate you for mayor. I was guessed another one join for mayor. Maybe we can change the system there. But it's just the reality is that it's going to take a collective effort. It's not going to be a one individual, one-off thing.
And we can't have a savior complex in how we do it either.
It's got to be collective.
Absolutely.
I used to serve on the board of YMCA, and that was one of the initiatives that we were pushing as well.
We have another question here.
Thank you.
Sure.
Collectively, your companies and institutions Thank you.
I can't even see
As
what
I was
Prince
saying,
Yeah.
collectively, your companies and institutions spend tens of millions of dollars in purchasing products and services to run your businesses. What strategies are you using to build wealth in communities of color through supplier diversity?
Wow.
Happy. I'm happy to take that.
Is that in 12 seconds we're supposed to answer that?
We're
12
actually
seconds.
beyond.
Well,
We're on the other side of the clock now.
Okay.
I think it's actually being very deliberate and intentional, partnering with the
Absolutely.
right organizations to do that. For example, last year we did for women how to do business with Hyatt. We also have an organization called Aspire, and Aspire is in place. It's out of D.C., if I'm not mistaken. We used to own it. We just sold it to Marriott. However, they would actually look at vendors to qualify them, to work with them so they can build scale to be able to do business with Hyatt. And we're doing now hotel ownership. So how to become a hotel owner, and the Asians own 27,000 hotels globally. Blacks own 500, women own very few. So how do we help people to educate them on the business, and how do we help to get them to scale? Connected with Chicago United 5 Forward program, where we're working with them and individuals that take 5 years and 5 companies come together to grow to get to scale. So you have to be deliberate and partner with the right organizations to be able to grow that mass.
I would say for us, it's about centralizing first purchasing, making sure that there is a coherent strategy. Not all of our Ys even purchase as one entity if they're one entity. We look at our strategy around diversity, inclusion, and global. We call it DIG. Supplier diversity can be the D&I side of it. Something like fair trade could be the global side of it. So when we think about this and really talk about the investment, as you said so well, where we spend our money is the biggest indicator of the type of world we want to have. That's a quote from the Fair Trade Conference that was here this past weekend that I was a part of. But we have to be intentional about that and change it from a transactional relationship to get what I need at the lowest cost to investing in populations or communities where we really want to stem inequities and put our money, forgive me, but where our mouths are.
That is the 4th pillar of civil rights. It's going to be building wealth and wealth builders. And if we don't do it, society will fail. One of our former leaders in government said that organizations, if they're not diversified, will defunct by 2010. Look who's not here. Because they didn't focus on technology, they didn't focus on innovation, and they didn't certainly focus on diverse colleagues, and those companies are not. I think it was Elaine Childs, Secretary of Labor, made that forecast, and it's come to pass. So I think if a message to that, to think about, each of us are given 24 hours to do what we will. When tomorrow comes, yesterday is gone. This conference will empower you to have data, statistics, and stats and best practices. What will you do when you go back to your organization in the next 24 hours to make a difference in the lives of those that you're working for, with, or those who you want to come in? This is legacy building time. As our colleague said earlier today, Speaker, this is about our children, our children's children. Now is the time to stand up for what's right.
All right.
I'm done.
It's like he dropped the mic. So that is our panel on innovation and inclusive hiring. Thank you so much to our panelists, to our audience. Tyronne Stoudemire, Chad Nico Hugh, Sayar Lonial, and Lauren Ryan. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank our wonderful moderator.